efficient. When you get a beginner and they start to gather glass, they tend to let it get a little too cold because it's easier to turn the pipe. The colder the glass is, the more rigid it is, so you can keep things on center. But to work the way that George is, maximizing that window of time, of heat, more or less, takes a lot of skill. It makes it look effortless, but it's quite deceiving. So he's doing quite a bit. This tool, this is one of my favorite tools. They're called jacks. They're steel blades, and he's done two things already with them. He's drawn what will be the neck of our pitcher out. He's pulled, elongated the form, and he's also squeezed down a tight, clean constriction. That's where we're going to break this free. It's a step that we include on everything we make, no matter what it is. Whether it's a little ornament, whether it's a gigantic platter or bowl, pitcher, anything. We need to have a controlled area to remove this piece out. So all these furnaces run on electricity. That's pretty rare. This is a very special shop. Not many shops like this in the world, actually. But if you go to a different glass studio, I bet that oven, that empty reheating oven, will run on either propane, natural gas, maybe diesel in England, or Europe, excuse me. But all electric equipment. This was designed after our program where we blow glass on cruise ships. So part of our outreach for the museum is to tell the world about glass. And we do demonstrations just like this on board 3 different celebrity cruise ships. They float around the sea all year round, every day, every night. We're blowing glass somewhere in the world. George has been out there. I've been out there. Is anybody familiar with this? When you walk through our museum, if you make it through the Innovations Center and you go out to the other side where there's another set of escalators, you can see a gigantic model of the Celebrity Solstice. That's the first ship that we were on, and it shows you the details. It's pretty well programmed. All right, so remember gravity? He used a little bit of that, but that spinning motion makes use of what? Centrifugal force. A lot of physics in what we do, really. Getting a lot done. Really changed the shape that time. You want to add a stem and a foot to this? Okay. So I've worked with George on this piece before, this style piece anyway. And with this series, he adds a couple components to finish off the bottom. And the first one's going to be a stem. And then once we have the stem established, we'll create the foot. But George likes to use this Venetian method of applying a little bit of glass. We call this spooling on. And notice how he uses the same tool, the jacks. Very functional tool. George, would you think those are probably the most versatile tool we have? I think most glass blowers would agree with us when we say they really are the most versatile. And you can see he's using one end, and then he'll flip it around and use the blade end again. And for this reason, you really want to just grab that tool in the middle. People ask us quite frequently, do you ever get burned? And yes, beginners are going to get burned more than an experienced person. But it's usually a tool. I think it's pretty rare that somebody would actually touch the glass on accident, but the tools can heat up to several hundred degrees, and you might not know. Well, hopefully you're a pretty fast learner, too. All right. So there he started to create a nice kind of a profile to that stem. I've seen him do different variations with these. There's a lot of fun you can play around with these. But once he gets that just right, we're going to apply some more glass the same fashion, and he can use a footing tool. Pull it out for him, get it ready. It's 2 pieces of cherry wood that have been soaked in water. It's a really hard tool to use, but it's fun to watch. George is good at this. And again, that's just some compressed air. If he's blowing air on one part of the piece, he's trying to draw the heat away from that, so it stops it from moving. So we created a little landing pad to apply this bit of glass to. And he'll use that as a point to go in there with this tool, the footing tool, and create a disc. We like to use fruit woods for the tools because they're very clean when they burn. They hold moisture really well too. That's what that's soaking in. Just ordinary tap water. I can't stress how easy he made that look. The first several times you try using that tool, you don't end up with a nice round disc. You usually have a taco-shaped foot on the bottom. Ready? Okay. So he's going to reheat the whole thing while I form up a punty. This is a finishing handle. So throughout this beginning stage, that blowpipe has been the handle to hold on to the piece. We've formed half of it on there. Well, the punty is just another handle this time solid rod, we don't need a blowpipe. And we'll get our piece to attach to it with a little bit of hot glass. This will be a temporary bond. Now, to make this temporary, I have to create a bit of a pointed shape here. And I'm also drawing heat out of the glass that I have. We don't want to attach this too hot, like the foot and the stem. That's a lot of heat in there, so those fused permanently. But this punchy, we want this to be slightly different. I think this is what we're looking for. We'll attach this right to the center of the foot. We want to keep in line with the blowpipe, and we can make sure of that by turning back and forth a couple times. It is pretty good. Now's where that constriction line becomes very important. We want this piece to break at the weakest point, and that's what George did with the setup. He made sure that that's the weakest area. We can enforce that weakness by scoring it, scratching it with a diamond file, and then just a little vibration is all it takes to break it free. They really like that part, George. How about a round of applause for that? That's a hard thing to do. Made that look very easy. The key, one of the keys, I'd say the most important thing of transferring a piece like that is the temperature. Now, this is soda-lime glass we're working with. It's a very common formula. If glass ever cools too quickly below its complete rigid state, what do you think happens to it? It breaks, yeah. Thermal shock will cause it to crack and break. Now, we used a little bit of control stress by scoring that constriction, and it held the crack right there. The setup was right, so the whole piece remained intact. But if his temperature was off a little bit, say it was just a little too cold, the whole thing could fall apart at that point. If the puncty that I brought was just a little too cold, it might have stuck and held, but when he tapped on that blowpipe, if my contact wasn't right, it could drop off that as well and hit the floor. So a lot can go wrong right there. The temperature, the timing have to be spot on. Now, to save anything we make, since we can't let it cool too quickly, we have to take it through an annealing cycle. It's a slow cooling process, and it happens in that oven. So this piece will go right in there. And from 900, that's really the safe point for this glass. It drops the temperature to room temperature over about 8 hours time. That's the length of the annealing. Now, that's dependent, the duration is dependent on how thick an item is. We can make a giant bubble, and if it's pretty thin, the wall thickness is thin, then 8 hours is still plenty of time. But let's say we made a bowling ball of solid glass, that could take up to 6 or 8 weeks to properly cool. So the thicker something is, the more tension it will have as it cools. Lip wrap? Okay. So George is going to create a picture, we know that. And it's the top will have a spout to it. Several ways to do this, but he's choosing to cut some of the glass away to shape that spout. It's a very tricky cut to make. Now, cutting into the glass is actually easy. As long as it's hot, it's pretty soft. It's somewhat like cutting into a strip of very thin leather. But to make that picture cut evenly on both sides is a little more challenging. While he's done that, I've begun a lip wrap. So now we're going to use some of that opaque green. So the soda-lime glass, who can tell me what the main ingredient to it is? I don't know if we talked about this. Sand. I think I heard somebody say silica. Silica is a very clean sand, comes from the Earth's crust. Add some soda ash and limestone, all in the powdered form. We call that batch. You melt batch down over time, it turns into the glass that's inside of our oven. Now, if you want to make colored glass, when you're mixing the batch, you mix in different metal oxides. Iron oxide would create the green that we have. Cobalt would make the blue. And fluorine, I believe, is what they use nowadays to make the opaque glass. So he's just fire polishing. If there's a little sharp area that's left from the trim, then he can fire polish that away with a torch. That's one thing with this electric setup. That electric reheating chamber isn't quite as aggressive with the heat. If we had a gas-fired glory hole or reheating chamber, then it would probably polish that lip, no problem. So here's our lip wrap. Just drawing it around. Now he's the one steering. I'm just kind of remaining loose-handed. Giving him more control. Goes all the way around. Cuts where he wants it. And there we go. You want me to start that handle for you now? Okay. Is this Roman handle or just cylinder? Cylinder? Okay. So one more thing. Our handle, and we'll keep the same green color. Now the blue that George is working with, at this point everybody can see that it is nice opal blue. But the green that we've put on is not going to look green at all. Some colors are just more distorted than others until they're properly annealed and down to room temperature. The color doesn't really change per se, it's just the heat that's distorting it. And this green is one of them. You want 2 coats of that or just 1? Okay. So a little more shaping to the spout. We save handles until the end of the process because we were to put this bit on and George wanted to change the shape of the lip or the spout, then the handle would get distorted as well. So we usually wait until the shape is complete. This metal table that I'm using is called a marver. This is a very common tool for a glass studio. Alright, George, you ready? Now, it doesn't matter what type of handle you do, they're all pretty tricky. They're fun to watch. First part's easy, he just tags it down where he wants it to start. But as soon as he cuts this bit free, glass has a lot of life to it when it's this hot. And some people say it's kind of like sculpting a noodle. So it sort of flops around. So he'll grab the tip of that with his tweezers. He curls it using gravity. Every movement is deliberate. Everything that he does is moving that. Check that out. George, they like that. Do it again. It's no secret when you watch that George has done this once or twice. The first handle you put on a piece, it usually just flops over, and as soon as it makes contact, it sticks, right? So that's what makes it pretty challenging. You have to have the heat there to reattach it, but you have to be able to control it at the same time. So this reheat right here will give him another opportunity to change the shape of the handle if he wants to stretch it a little bit or change the curve. But you really have to get that handle shaped up pretty quick before it turns solid. There's no reheating the glass after we make something. If we pull this out of the oven tomorrow and the handle's crooked, we can't just torch the handle and turn it back. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Turn it just that way slightly. This is the back end. There you go. That looks pretty good. You don't want me to put my hand in there and check? Alright. Beautiful piece. One more little fire polish. This torch is very handy for us. That's hooked into our natural gas and this oxygen line that runs to us. We could actually get that up to probably 4,000 degrees if we needed to. Little tap, breaks right off. We can fire polish our bunting mark. And yes, you can give a thunderous round of applause for a beautiful piece by George Henry. There's the last look into the oven it goes. We will load this annealer throughout the day. We keep making items and placing them in here. This runs idle at 900 degrees, so everything's safe at that temperature. Then our last piece of glass goes in there, we engage the annealing program, the computer controller will ramp it down very slowly so everything cools together. Folks, that wraps up this hot glass show, but I want to thank you for attending. Enjoy the rest of your time.